Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Survivor 50 Wishlist podcast, an off-season series where we're determining who could and should come back for Survivor 50. My name is Mike Bloom, and today, look over that dune. Oh, it's the Brazilian highlands of Tocantins, as we're talking about, as of this moment, the last 16-person cast in a Survivor history. And what a cast, considering the winners, runners up that it has produced. Now, of course, I am not alone here. We have been keeping a pretty good pace when it comes to this podcast, but I'm so excited to be bringing on somebody who definitely knows what a pace is. It is the great Mary Kwiatkowski. Mary, how are you?
What's a pace? How far is a pace?
Your southern accent is chef's kiss. My God. It's like a slice taken out of the Sun Belt.
You know, I was just thinking about Survivor Tocantins outside of this the other day because my kickball team, my rec kickball team, in order to pick our lineup for the last couple of years, we've done a Brant Steele, and whoever wins is the first kicker,
All right,
etc.
well, give me the time and place, and I'll be there to run that Brand Steele.
Yeah, let's just say when they ran it, I was the Sandy Bergen. So I was the
You weren't
person
first
voted
out.
I was voted out of my tribe, and then I was first or second or whatever out. So yeah, it was pretty bad.
Oh, well, listen, was there at one point where someone was trying to run a base kickball and you grabbed them by their bra strap and rode them like a horse, like Sandy did that one time?
Yeah, and I'll probably do that in kickball. In the outfield. I think that's
It's
like a great move.
not against the rules.
It's Airbud rules. It's not on the list, so then it's fine.
I bet your coach would say that one time he taught a golden retriever how to play basketball, because we're today talking about
100%.
the man of 1,000 stories and the other people that frequented Survivor Tocantins, and we are looking at it specifically through the lens of who could and should come back for Survivor 50. Mary, I keep saying that this era, the Tocantins of Survivor, is really the experimental era, where post All-Stars, they're really trying out a bunch of stuff. And between this and Survivor Thailand, we also get the show experimenting with a format that a lot of people have been talking about, even back in those days, of back to basics, where 16 contestants, 2 tribes, no idols, a jury of 7, a final 2, one of the final 2 final 2s in the show's history. Idols are there, but they don't get used whatsoever, don't really play into the season at all. There's this exile twist, but even that sort of cross-tribal aspect ends up falling apart. And so we get, Mary, this kind of old school season baked into the middle of a very experimental time for the show.
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good season to watch early on if you're someone who's getting into Survivor, but you don't want to do chronological and you want to hop around a little. It's one of the first ones I always recommend to people. It's great if you also want to then go and watch some like Heroes versus Villains or some other returning seasons. You'll see a couple of these faces come back, and it's fun, but it still has gameplay. I think that there are moments that feel like you're saying back to basics while it still feels very fresh. I know Rob has talked in the past about some of these seasons being kind of like his lost era, the ones that he didn't watch as much. These are probably like 15, 17, 18. These are some of my most rewatched seasons by far. So I love Tocantins. I love the cast in general is like a lot of heavy hitters. And even though it was back to basics, they threw some interesting things in there. I know a lot has been talked about over the years of the Exile Alliance, whether or not that could have been anything, why we haven't seen that come back in some of the ways that it could. Like, you can kind of draw a comparison to that and the journeys that people go on now, but it's like, at this time, it felt like such a fresh thing. Like, oh, these are people from different tribes getting to meet and talk and strategize. And then nowadays it's just kind of like, everyone's going to keep their cards close to the vest. So.
And then you also bake in, of course, the Jalapao underdog story that we're going to get it the very next season. But again, it was very rare back in those days, especially that, yes, Survivor strategy has certainly accelerated since the old days of whichever tribe has more of the numbers at the merge, they're just going to wipe out the other tribe. That's how Survivor works. But Timbira has like an incredible collapse that, yes, it gets rid of 2 people early on, but really for the rest of the pre-merge, there is this absolute boiling pot of this leadership dissension between Brendan and Coach that then immediately boils over once we get to the merge and everyone's like, oh my God, JT's the new hotness. We love JT. Hell, this is late 2000s. JT is in, be it Justin Timberlake or James Thomas. That was all the rage there. And so as a result, all the Timbiras immediately turn on each other, and the Jalapaos are empowered to the point where they become 3 of the final 4. And as we're about to get into, it also ends up burgeoning, not burgeoning, this really powerful, fun duo in Steven and JT, which, again, speaking to that old school vibe, harkens back to that original Survivor mindset of people from walks of life put together in this odd social experiment where also they have to vote each other out and seeing what would happen. And yeah, the cattle rancher from Alabama and the kind of a nebbishy guy from New York probably would not cross paths in their life if they could help it. But under these circumstances, they became on island, or I guess on continent, BFFs and end up making the final 2 in what some would consider one of the greatest final 2s ever.
Yeah, and then a lasting friendship through the the ages. It's a great story. This season has kind of has it all. It's got kooky characters, it's got strategy, it's got people who many of the viewers and cast might find irritating or annoying, but like in a fun way, not in a oh my gosh, I can't get through these episodes way. I have a lot of thoughts on a lot of the people in the cast, and I know that some of those things differ with what I've heard from the players that were actually out there, so I can only speak from like a viewer point of view. But yeah, it's such an interesting season. It is, probably going to mention it, but it is a season that a few people have come back from and come back multiple times. So I'm curious to know from your standpoint on which of these characters you think should we concentrate on now, or are they going to be pushed to later?
Yeah, I mean, let's start from our top down and sort of work our way through, because to your point, really, Tocantins can be boiled down. The way that sometimes people view it is, oh, there are 4 really great cast members, and then we don't really care about anybody else. And I think that's
Disagree.
that's giving a short shrift to some people that we are going to warrant for discussion. But as we've been doing with this series as well, if we are under the sort of enigmatic guise of, okay, maybe 50 would be a legend season, I think it would be tough to write off some of these people not returning. But on that note, I do want to start with our aforementioned final 2. Let's talk about JT and Steven. So do we want to start, Mary, with the one that will be the easier discussion or the one that will be the more complex discussion?
Well, I'm not sure who you mean for this.
Yeah, so this is a blind, this is the urn that you have to reach into. Which one would you rather take?
Let's start with the easier discussion.
Okay, let's start with the easier discussion. Get this out of the way. I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we can expect Stephen Fishback to do plenty of podcasting and tweeting about Survivor till Kingdom Come. The bad news is because he's never going back to Survivor anytime soon. He said that a good amount of times. He even said it in his quarantine questionnaire. Just to make sure, I asked him point blank on the record in the past couple days, would you want to come back? And he responded with an emphatic, succinct no. So, as much as I'm sure we all would love to see it, especially those of us in the RHAP community, Steven's life is fine. He had that itch scratch, that what if answer to a certain extent by being on Survivor Second Chance, but I think he has now firmly hung up his buff and is more than happy to observe through his shit-covered glasses, as a former winner might put it.
So, yes, that is what I wrote in my notes. I had written, he would be probably one of my number one people that I would want to come back and would want to see again. But given everything you just said, he has young children, he's in a different priority stage of his life. I completely understand why he wouldn't want to come back. I would still love to see him play again. I think there's more there. I would say, even though there's a lot of people in this cast, or a couple other people who have played multiple times, Steven would be the one that I would want to see again, just because I think that there's more we don't know about that could happen. Some of the other people we've seen. And this is where it gets confusing for me when we talk about everyone else. The way that I'm looking at Survivor 50, I think there's kind of 2 things on the table. You either say This is Legends, and we need the biggest names. But I don't want to just see Survivor heroes versus villains again, or winners at war again. There's people we've seen 3, 4, 5 times, and I love them. They're great. Loved watching them, but I feel like it would be the same old story with that. I think all of the players from the more recent seasons would have an upper hand, and there would probably be more of them cast, and then all our legends that we love would just be sent home one after another. Maybe a couple would sneak out to the end, but that would be about it. A lot of these people we've seen on many, many shows, and I would love for Survivor 50 to take a second and go, let's see some people who could be legends, but we've maybe only seen them once or twice before.
Legends in the making.
Yeah, that's what I would love, but I don't know that everyone's going to agree with that. I think there's plenty of people who are going to say, because I could sit right here and, list off the, 10 or 20 most legendary survivors, and it would probably overlap with almost everyone else's list. And that's because we've seen them before. They're legends because we've seen them 3 or 4 times. Whereas if there's a lot of people, if we had seen them twice, they might be legends. We just don't know because we haven't seen them. So I would love to think about this more as like, who are some gems that would be great to see again, even though you might not necessarily call them legends right now. We also don't know that Survivor 50 is legends necessarily, right? It could just be some refreshing returns. I would love that.
I think I'm definitely on the same page with you with what I want to see with 50. I think we could leave striking a happy medium, and I think something that might help is that I do think one of these quote-unquote legend spots on this list will be empty, because I do not think production would ask JT back for time number 4. Of course, JT leads one of the most popular, prolific games of those first 20 seasons, where, again, everyone's underestimating him. He's this good old boy from the South. He's even left out of the Exile Alliance, but he's got the Riz. Mary, for whatever reason, he gets to that merge and everyone is just obsessed with him. I'm pretty sure he goes on every single reward that season, whether he's brought or he wins it himself. The Timbira people immediately want to work with him on either side, which makes him and the Jollop House such pivotal swing votes. Even towards the end of the season, when Steven's like, oh my God, no, this guy can't get to the end. He's going to clear up all the votes. JT wins the last 3 immunities and ends up being unvotable at that point. On top of that, to that point, he also showed a surprising physical capacity as well. And then when we get into the finale, I think some of us that were more strategy minded were like, okay, yeah, JT was a bit more of the heart, but Steven was the brain. Steven can vocalize why, his game was superior to JT. And I love Steven, but JT freaking steamrolled him at that final tribal council, and so expertly done. Guilting him by being like, wow, I can't believe you said that you wouldn't take me to the end. This dude has some cutthroat aspects to him, as we would see in Heroes versus Villains, where he comes back and tries to pull the Sarah Lucina a bit, right? Of last time I played a cattle rancher, this time I'm going to play like a cattle thief. And he is the one that will end up taking advantage of Tom Westman's idol play to take out Sari. He does end up becoming, unfortunately, the pen holder behind that iconic move, giving the idol to Russell. Though I do think in retrospect, it was backed by the heroes, and I think there was some stuff that wouldn't necessarily make it feel like it's the dumbest thing anyone has ever done in the history of show, point blank. Not helped by the fact that the season after that, he gets voted out with an idol in his pocket. So I think on the one hand, there's this idea of certainly over the course of this series, we've already brought back people that have played multiple times, but I would say that there isn't anybody that's maybe tanked is an odd term, but sort of maybe dulled the shine of their sterling reputation from the beginning more than JT. I mean, JT was voted, I think he was the first.
Colby in that category, but
Colby might be there as well, but Colby made the finale, at least in his 3rd season. JT.
But at what cost?
I mean, JT won the $1 million and the fan favorite prize. JT played the first ever perfect game in Survivor history. And I don't want to dispel any of those notions. I think his Tocantins game is so strong, and I feel like we shouldn't necessarily take his other 2 instances and look back on that being like, oh, it's a fluke. It could not have possibly been a fluke. I do think if you're looking at it from a Legends perspective, I do wonder if JT has kind of maybe not necessarily won that label over the course of his last 2 times, even though I think what he does in Heroes versus Villains is pretty damn legendary. I will add on to all that allegedly there is this rumor that I think Russell and Sandra and maybe Tyson have mentioned about how when JT gets voted off, he becomes a little bit tough for production to handle. They have not gone into further details about that, but they seem to imply that maybe he has burned some bridges when it comes to like the actual behind the scenes team, to the extent where he was on a Winners at War like mini interview with Steven, and he expressed that he was not even contacted for it.
So almost a year ago, I actually did a podcast with Kevin and Nigel on RHAP about whether or not JT was overrated and everything. And it was part of their You Thought You Knew series. And I thought a lot about basically what you just said of, did his subsequent games dull his shine? What do you think about that? And my main conclusion there was, I think a lot of times when you play a game in a certain way that has a lot of sort of hiding your skill baked into the game, you can't replicate that. You just can't do that multiple times. And we've seen people come and pivot and play a different style game and it work out for them. But I don't think for JT that was possible the second or third time in order to be successful at that. It was interesting watching him, but I just think we saw it, we did it, we can move on now. Like, it was cool, it was great, enjoyed it. But yeah, I think that there are other people that we could talk about that would be a little more interesting to come back. Love JT, liked watching him. I actually really enjoyed his time in Game Changers, just because I think that was sort of the happy medium of well, that's not the right way. He decided to go full like villain as opposed to on Heroes versus Villains, where he was like, I'm gonna try to play differently, but I'm still sort of heroic. Is like, I like this. This is cool. This is interesting to watch, but it wasn't winning.
Yeah. So again, not to take away from JT's awesome game in Tocantins, I do recommend that people, to Mary's point, not only watch the season, but just like observe this effect that this guy had on the people out there in the Brazilian highlands, because it truly was like absolutely second to none. And there's a reason why he ends up getting all 7 jury votes in the process.
And I'm trying to think if there's been anyone like that again who even the audience pretty much got behind, of like, oh yes, of course. I mean, this was, he was a casual Survivor fan's dream. Like, I remember my parents, everyone in my family was like, oh yeah, 100%, got to be JT, perfect, full package. And I mean, it's like there's some similarities with him and like the allure that Rupert had early on, almost.
Yeah.
Just with very different gameplay.
And they're going to share a beach in a couple seasons from now. So let's move on here from these two. And it's odd because, yeah, one of the arguable best final twos in history. I don't think either one are necessarily in contention right now. But here's where we turn to our jury. We have Brendan, Tyson, Sierra, Debbie, Coach, Taj, and Aaron. Where do you want to start, Mary? Do we want to talk about the elephant-sized coach and assistant coach in the room, or should we get to your point, maybe some of those more wild cards, why aren't they back types?
You know what? Let's talk about Coach and Tyson, because I have some similar overlap with what we've been talking about with JT on that. Coach and Tyson have both returned multiple times. Coach and Tyson have both done well, and we've seen some different things from them. I've said before, Tyson is my favorite character on Survivor.
So
I think that all of his gameplay is extremely interesting to watch. I think that he's got a lot of skill. He's still talking about Survivor, clearly still likes it. Probably would come back unless he's told you something otherwise.
So he has said, I believe he said on maybe as recent as like one of the last Survivor 46 podcasts that he's done, saying like, quote, I'm practically retired. And I think that adverb is the key thing, where I believe even Shane Powers tweeted it out, where he's like, AKA, I'll come back for 50, and that's about it. And that's the sense I get as well. I adore Tyson. I think he is just one of the best confessionalists out there, and has maybe some of the driest wit I've ever seen on a human being, let alone a reality TV contestant. I do feel like we got such an interesting 4-season arc, and I'll admit, like, after the first 3 seasons, I thought I was kind of done with Tyson, where he had this arc of like, cocky yet comical, braggadocious youngster gets blindsided brutally at the final 8, comes back for Heroes versus Villains, gets blindsided even more brutally, and commits one of the most unforced errors in Survivor history. Then comes back for the 3rd time. Yes, he's definitely less funny, cupcake belt aside, but was able to do what he couldn't do all those years ago, make up for his mistakes, dominate Blood versus Water, and go on to win. And I thought, okay, maybe this is just the full 3-season arc, and we'll compare that to Coach, right? Another comic character that had her killing in that 3rd season and made it to the end. But I'll admit, the 4th season, I did like seeing at least the aspect of Tyson of the family visit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Since he had left Survivor Blood versus Water, he had married the person that he was playing against in Rachel and had children. And so it was nice to kind of follow Tyson through that journey from, 2009 to 2020. So on paper, I would say, yeah, we don't need time number 5 out of Tyson. The thing that would want me to put him on this list, and if not today, then definitely in something like Blood versus Water, is, well, I'm bringing back for the, again, legend experiment here, all these other players. We're voting in Sandra, we're voting in Rupert, we're voting in Boston Rob. I don't see why I would put them on the ballot and not Tyson for time number 5.
I agree. What's interesting, though, is I also think that Tyson could do well without those people. Like, I think he fits into that mold well, but I think if you put in a whole bunch of people who were new era Survivor players or just other quote unquote legends that we haven't seen back as much, I think Tyson can mesh with them. I think we've seen on things like the Challenge USA that Tyson does a great job with new faces as well, and still has a lot of that competitive spirit.
And not to mention, he's been bringing new era people on to his podcast. So much like we talked about with Rob, like he's someone who has direct relationships now with these new era players.
Right, which is very useful. And I would hope, I know this isn't the point of the podcast, but my biggest dream for Survivor 50 would be that it doesn't turn into the same old school versus new school situation we had in Survivor 40. I would like to see more mingling and meshing and, yes, it'd be great to see some early players come back. I want those early players to not be like, I don't know what's going on and who's this? No, do your work, come in, make the relationships. I want everyone to have a fighting chance. And I don't want people to single off based off or, separate off based on, which clump of seasons they played. So that would be my goal. And I think that Tyson would be someone who could bridge gaps well in that way. So I would still be happy to see Tyson come back, even though he's played the most.
Mm-hmm.
I think that unlike JT, I think that he's had more success in some of his subsequent runs, just in terms of showing what type of skill he also has.
Well, not to even mention from a physical perspective, he's young comparatively to the rest of our list. He's only 44 years old, which is on the younger side of the people we put in so far. And this guy showed off his physical prowess recently, not even on the challenge, but in challenges, considering he won his way back from the edge of extinction in Winners at War. So he's someone who is clearly an athlete too, where if his back does end up against the wall for whatever reason, we're not necessarily dealing with maybe some more physical circumstances like we are some of these other old school players.
Yes. So I think that I'd still put I'd put a question mark by Tyson, but he's on my short list. All right, so
let's talk about the other side of this coin, as I spoke about before. Let's talk about the arc of Benjamin Coach Wade. He has been telling Chucky the Cheese jokes since all the way back in 2009, where he is arguably the character of Survivor Tocantins. We are in this era of Survivor where editing in particular is really focused around one big main character. We had this with Sugar in Gabon. We have this here with Coach. We'll have 2 seasons of it in Russell. We'll have it with Boston Rob and Redemption Island. And so Coach is a huge focus. He is the thing that people were talking about. Here is this ridiculous man. Who is this jackass coming in, conducting to himself, trying to brand himself the leader of the tribe, telling these questionable stories about having his asshole get eaten out by tribes in the Amazon. And he ends up lasting to the penultimate episode, which some would call still one of the greatest episodes in Survivor history. I've been personally taking the monastic approach to this series by just depriving myself, locking myself in this room for the past month or so at this point. So I've carved a microphone out of a stick off camera personally that I'm ready to walk in with. Coach is a massive, massive character. So when he gets brought back 2 seasons later, it makes sense. I don't think he would consider himself a villain, but he was definitely in the category of like people did not like him both on screen and off, which made him a villain. He ends up sort of dying the way that he would want to, which is he's so honorable, he can't vote Boston Rob out, but he doesn't help Boston Rob, and then he immediately gets taken out next time when Sandra plants a lie. And then he decides, okay, maybe duplicity is thy name, and comes in for South Pacific, where he is able to form this incredible alliance, basically the thing that he always wanted, right? Which is, I want to come in, I want to lead a tribe like a family, I want everyone around me as their leader, and then I'm going to take them to the end and I'm going to win. And it nearly happened. And he ends up losing somewhat controversially 6-3 after it turns out that, yeah, he tried to kind of have his cake and eat it too by getting to the final three and saying, like, yes, I was the one that led all these moves and backstabbed everybody, but I still did try to play with so much honesty and loyalty as I could. Did not sit well with the jurors, and Coach becomes one of the rare returning players to lose to a newbie in a final three, final two situation. It's been at least a decade since we have seen Coach. Mary, are you jonesing for more?
I think of the 3 seasons, Coach's arc was coach the character, coach the human, and then coach the player in that order. And I find that his game in South Pacific is one of the more interesting ones to watch, just because that to me was someone who said, okay, this is how people perceive me. This is the character I want to be for TV. How can I tweak that and parlay that into someone who could actually win? And it was, there's a lot of interesting things to discuss when it comes to South Pacific, and Coach's way that he handled that tribe is one of them. I would be fine seeing Coach back. I'm not desperate for it. I think it'd be okay. To kind of reiterate what I was saying before, when you look at a lot of the recent returning player seasons, there's a lot of the same people who get brought back. Whereas when you look at some of the original ones, look at fan versus favorite one, even heroes versus villains, that for the even blood versus water, you're seeing people, and there's probably 5 or 6 or 7 people in the cast that you go, huh, yeah, I never really thought of them as being like someone that we need to return. And I think that's the problem with saying, like, hyping up Survivor 50 to be like, it's legends, because it's like, all right, well, then we're just going to see the same people over and over. It's like, remember when you could have a returning player season and there are some people you go, oh, that's a little weird that they're here. And maybe some of them are duds and some of them turn into Parvati. You know what I mean? Like, I think
so bring back all the young, attractive women. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying, like, Parvati's someone who, based on her performance on her first season, you would not have expected her to become a legend the way that she is now.
Yeah.
And so I am hunting for some of those people. But so I'd say I could take relief Coach. I think he's interesting. I think he's definitely something a lot of people would go to and think instantly, yeah, gotta have Coach. But I also feel like, wait, yeah, we had Coach.
Yeah, I think that much like Tyson, his 3-season arc was very much complete in that I think unfortunately it ends with more unhappiness, and that, yeah, Coach, just based on the way that he's been iron sharpens iron since the beginning, will inevitably get cut by said blade. That said, I will bring up that Coach has said recently that he did retire from reality television, but he's gone a bit by the bug again. He did say in an interview that basically he owes it to the fans and himself to go on the show one more time, but it has to be the right time and the right theme. So he's kind of in this category of someone that I already talked about in the form of Amanda Kimmel, where, like, they are definitely bastions of that specific era. I mean, he was on 3 times over the course of 5 seasons, but, I am intrigued to maybe see how, what is he, like 52-year-old Coach would be. He's had 2 children and gotten married since his time on the show. Obviously, he's done a lot of different things in his life. He played the trumpet national anthem for a Buffalo Bills playoff game, I think it was, earlier this year. So, like, the dude has done many things and accumulated many more stories. And if he's keen on sort of coming out of retirement and coming back on, I'm not entirely sure how much new will be there, but who knows? Maybe like a Silver Fox Papa Coach might bring an entirely new vibe to all this.
Yeah, that would be interesting to see something different. I think my main question for Coach is, I think Coach does have the fans in mind. Does Coach have the other players in mind, particularly the more recent ones? Like, in the way that Tyson, we just talked about, is more tapped in, is, up on the game. is coach. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's move into obviously all these other people because these are the wild cards. I want to unfortunately have to discount someone, and it is our third member of Jalapao. I would love to see Taj back here. Of course, SWB, she was someone who did have a voice on this season. I mean, it's odd because I feel like in the post-merge, she almost fades away as a character, but she
Yeah.
was like the main character of Jalapao, in my opinion, in the pre-merge. Now, maybe it's because she was going to tribal council all the time and she was going to exile all the time and brokering this cross-tribal deal with Brendan, working with Steven to find the idol. But she does kind of peter out towards the end as it becomes more of the Steven and JT show than the Steven and Taj show. But I always love Taj. Her see you back at the camp reaction moment is an all-time loved ones moment on Survivor. Unfortunately, when it comes to Taj, she has been asked, as she's expressed on Talking with T-Bird, a bunch more times since she played in Tocantins. She was asked back for Heroes versus Villains. I would imagine I actually think she might have been asked back for maybe Karamoan or South Pacific. Ironically enough, of all seasons, she was not asked back with Eddie George for Blood versus Water, because I believe by that time she had kind of declined them so much that they're like, all right, if the credit card's being declined every time I swipe it, then I'm just not going to use this card anymore. She's expressed now, speaking coach style in the third person on Talking with T-Bird, quote, Taj probably won't ever be back. There's no way in hell I'm going out anywhere with no soap, no toilet tissue, no food. I need a good, cushy pillow. I'm just too bougie right now. But not to mention, I've had 4 knee surgeries since there. I don't know what happened. I came back and my Achilles and meniscus just started popping every other day. So my knees are not even the same. I wouldn't be able to do the challenges. I wouldn't want to do them. So it seems like even if Taj did express the desire to come back, and also SWV is like in it right now, I think they just announced a tour at the moment, so she is booked and blessed. It crushes my heart to say the stars really are not aligning to get Taj on as an all-star.
Yeah, and I'm bummed because all things being different, if this was we could take anybody, disregarding age or anything, I would have Taj there. But yep, say I had the same notes on that one. So unfortunate.
All right. I wanna actually have some discussions now about some people that could say yes, and I want to move Mary one step to Taj's left to Aaron.
Yeah,
Because Aaron is somebody who, again, I think the perception of Tocantins is, well, it was Steven, it was JT, it was Tyson, it was Coach, it was maybe a little bit of Taj. Everyone else, who's that? And that feels like giving Aaron Lobdell a bit of a disservice. First off, how could you undersell a woman who gave the iconic quote, "Who is this jackass?" That is maybe one of the greatest secret scenes clip show episodes of all time just because of that. But this is somebody who, for my money, had a good amount of game to her, more than you realize, where she was definitely on the outs of Timbira early on. Definitely not as much on the outs as Sierra was, but certainly coming into this merge situation, after Brendan's taken out, it really does seem like, okay, there's this unholy trinity of Tyson, Coach, and Debbie, and they're going to take aim at Sierra next. And I know a lot of people give the Jalaphouse credit for the Tyson move, understandably so, but Aaron is someone that, if I remember correctly, was shown as helping spearhead that as well. She was the one to actually flip on her original tribe and make the move and get in bed with these 3 Jalaphouse that's going to take her all the way to the Final 4. And if she wins Samotion, she ends up getting to that Final 2. Now, look, does she stand a chance at winning? I'm not entirely sure. But I do think as a character and as a player, Aaron is a bit underrated. Not to mention, we go to the where are they now of it all. Aaron is now 41 years old. She is married. She has, I believe, 4 children at this point. And when asked about coming back in her quarantine questionnaire, she said, I've always said that it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And if you have the chance to go twice, you have to take it. And then she basically says, it's easier to do 10 years ago than now when I have young children to take care of. However, it is my life dream to prove to them that I am cooler than their dad. I think this would tip the scales in my favor and teach them a thing or two about hard work, perseverance, and when it's actually okay to call someone a jackass. That, to me, Mary, indicates that I think Aaron's looking for another shot at goal.
Yeah, spoilers, Erin's on my list of who I'd want to see back. I think that Erin, I mean, it's been a few years, but she's only 41. She's still someone who's has a desire to come back, which is huge.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that was the quarantine questionnaire. That was a few years ago. Her kids have gotten a little bit older, maybe that would change things. It's a shorter game now.
I
That
think
might
her
change
most
things.
recent son was born in 2019, so he would be 6 years old when she would go
Yeah,
out
a
there.
little easier. I think I agree with everything you said. I think she's very underrated. I think that because if someone like Coach wasn't on this season, we'd probably have seen more of Erin. Like we probably would have gotten more confessionals, and I think that Erin did have a lot of strategy, and she'd be someone that I would trust to do the research and be on top of things and not come into the game blind.
Well, you talk about doing your research. You might not remember this, Mary, but Erin technically had a brief tenure as a Survivor Know-It-All, as
Oh,
recently back as Survivor 42,
that's
where
right.
Rob was doing a live show and Erin stepped in to talk with Steven. So, yeah, she is somebody who has been watching the new era at least. And she was, I believe, contacted for Blood versus Water, though I think now the rumor is that like everyone and their mothers probably quite literally were contacted for Blood versus Water, but her and her husband were at some point. So it's not like she was directly sort of written off by production. So I personally would love to see it. And yeah, I think if there was like a player that I would legitimately want to see for a format that I would more so like from a 50, which would be a bit more leaning towards those one-time players and legends in the making, Erin might be the number one with the bullet I would want to see out of Tocantins.
Yeah. Yeah, she was the first person I thought of about coming back outside of the legends we've already discussed.
Well, I want to dote on her Timbira outcast sister here in the form of Sierra Reed. I mean, Sierra was, I guess, the other side of your kickball coin, Mary, in that she was also
Yep.
voted the most disposable by her tribe on the first day because I'm pretty sure she had like a sinus infection or something coming into the game. Luckily, she wasn't voted out. This wasn't actual Blood versus Water. And she gets to go back to Timbira, kind of coast on their winning streak as well as some other stuff happening with other players. When she ends up getting to, the final 9, she loses her number 1 ally in Brendan, the dragon himself. And what's a bride without a dragon? She does end up surviving for one more vote, but then it just gets to the point where even the Jollop House plus Erin are like, yeah, we gotta cut her loose at a certain point. Let's make good with Coach and Debbie and get one for them. I mention her because Sierra apparently was nearly on the cast of Survivor Heroes versus Villains as a hero. She did say yes, but the story that she told Dalton Ross is that at the time she had actually just gotten engaged to one of the producers on the show.
Yes.
He is no longer a producer, so I'm not sure if mixing business with pleasure is on the table still. But what do you think about Sierra Reed as a possibility here?
So this is the person I was hinting to earlier, where I seem to have different opinions on them as a viewer than the cast. I have heard people in the cast, Tyson being one of them, mention many times, like, no, trust me, it was hard to live with her. Whereas when I watch it, I'm just like, oh, why is this poor girl, being picked on so much? So I liked Sierra. I think Sierra in another universe is similar to Courtney Yates. Like it's a similar archetype of the like the grouchy girl who's not necessarily fitting in with people and being picked on and is worried about being weaker. And I think that there would be some there. I would be interested in seeing Sierra play again. My one worry would be like, who on a cast would play with Sierra? Like who would,
Yeah.
like I'm just trying to
Yeah, are we
picture the
facing like
archetype
a
of someone
wait,
who would do
was
it.
Sierra like the proto Venus where it's like nobody's
Yeah,
playing with me?
yeah, similar kind of idea. And so like if Sierra's on a season where you have someone like Venus, or let's put like someone like Marianne. Is Marianne gonna play with Sierra? I don't know. That would be so interesting.
Oh, they could have a ship named Mariera.
Yeah, because even someone like Venus is probably one of the better examples of a more recent player who fits a similar mold. But even then, I feel like people were not as just like rude to her face as they were Sierra on
Yeah,
the
I mean, listen, it's Tyson, but he had some incredibly disparaging words to Sierra, both behind her back and directly in front of her at Tribal Council.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know. I think Sierra would be an interesting person to see. But
How about her partner in crime in the aforementioned dragon himself in Brendan? Because yeah, the Exile Island twist alliance, etc. narrative is so interesting because again, that really is the emphasis of the pre-merge. And then we get to the merge, and it's Brendan being up for the vote by his Timbira allies, and we think, oh, okay, so the Jalapenos will now gather around him, the Exile Alliance will mobilize, and one of Tyson or Coach or Debbie will go. We get that delayed a bit with the Joe medevac, but then Brendan gets voted out pretty much unanimously. And the Jalapenos take the Coach Debbie Tyson side. It's a little bit like, then why did we do that? What's the reason why any of that ended up happening? For what it's worth, it seemed like Brendan was somebody who kind of, speaking of that old school vibe, kind of did remind me of some of those Hunter Ellis alpha male types, right? Where also Brendan is, of course, a very successful businessman coming into this. So I think he was more than happy to be one of the more outspoken members of the tribe, to Coach's chagrin. I really go back and forth as to whether I would want to see him again. He has certainly expressed that he has. He actually said in his quarantine questionnaire, I love how many more variables there are in the gameplay, which I know is music to Jeff's ears. I just wonder if there are other types that have come after him that maybe are more appealing than Brendan himself.
yeah, I think this is going to be like whatever the opposite of recency bias is. Like, I think if this was season, I mean, I'm surprised that he kind of wasn't cast for some of those other earlier returning player seasons.
I mean, it's tough because it seems like, he was making so many Survivor 46 comparisons. He really is like the Liz Wilcox, right? Where he came in talking about his millions. So it seems like he was more than happy to dip out, get back to business quite literally. And now he's sort of coming around to saying, yeah, you know what? I could play again.
Yeah, I think he's someone that if he showed up on the cast, I'd be happy to see him. Like, he was someone who, when I just before I even kind of refreshed my memory on Tocantins, the first people that I was thinking about coming back, I was like, oh, it'd be cool to see Aaron and Brendan come back. Like, I think those are the first names that popped in my head. I really like the fact that Brendan has said that would like to play again. He used the term 100%, which is great, saying I would like to come back. Like you mentioned, being aware of how many different variables are in the game now, how much more gamey it is. I think that's great to hear, even though he was kind of a more old-fashioned, traditional kind of player. So I'd be happy to see him. I don't think Survivor's going to think of him, but I think it'd be cool.
Well, let's finish off with the jury, and I'm pretty sure my math is correct, even though hers wasn't in the auction. Debbie Beebe, she was on Talking with T-Bird. I think she was one of the more recent people to talk to. She, surprise, surprise, Mary, was contacted for Blood versus Water, but is somebody who would come back. I do feel like she had her moments, but I think, especially compared to, obviously, the cast around her, I would not necessarily call her, the most remembered person in Tocantins or someone who had the most potential to warrant a comeback.
This is the person I was referring to when I was saying I found Debbie to be one of the biggest villains on this season.
Wow!
And again, it's from me watching and being like, oh, I don't know why everyone hates Sierra so much.
I guess that's true.
Debbie
By proxy,
horrible.
This is more so the enemy of my friend is my enemy.
Exactly. It was that scenario. So every time I watch it, I just go, oh, I'm so uncomfortable with how mean she's being, but kind of in a great way. From a, a viewership standpoint, there are some similarities that I could see in Debbie's thought process to someone like Maria, playing Maria, kind of a very I might be a little more straightforward to your face, and I might come across a little cold, but she's playing, she's in it. I think a lot of what she was doing there at the end with Sierra was in an effort to save herself because she wasn't going to roll over and die. So I think that's interesting. I think she's very similar as Brendan. I don't know that production would think of her, but I wouldn't hate it if she showed up.
All right, well, let's move into our pre-merge portion and look at these cast of characters. So we have, in order, Carolina. They just love blindsiding her, including at the Redemption Island reunion, and also including when said person who proposed to her ended up cheating on her with another Survivor alumni. We have Candace, who really the only thing I remember was when she asked Tyson about, how to prepare the fish, and he told her straight to her face that, like, oh, they have tinfoil and citrus out there, and then he glittered about the fact that he lied straight to her face. We had Jerry, the veteran, who basically got voted out because he got sick. We had, of course, the aforementioned Sandy, an absolute beacon of light. We have Spencer, who was really the young lad 1.0, where he was a man named Spencer who came in at 19, one of the youngest castaways in Survivor history. We have Sydney, who was the model and was blindsided alongside her flirtmance partner in Joe Dowdle, who is unfortunately probably one of the most nondescript medevacs in Survivor history. I mean, no offense to the pre-merge, pre-jury boots of Survivor Tocantins, but I think one of the only people I would want to highlight for a return appearance would be Spencer, because I think that there is just so much appeal in the idea that, again, this guy I think he was actually 18 at the time when this filmed. Of course, Frosty sort of lowered the gate as to people under 21 being asked onto the show. And so Spencer ended up coming on here. So he is 34 at the moment. He is my age. And so obviously if we're worrying about any sort of age restrictions when it comes to putting people on a short list, Spencer wouldn't necessarily fall into that. Not to mention he was a big fan at the time. I'm not sure if he still is. Also, the circumstances of his boot were a little sucky, right? It was that basically he got flagged by people like JT as, well, he's not pulling his weight. He didn't do the lacrosse thing. I broke a tooth. What did you do, Spencer? And then kind of got booted as a result. So
he was 18. He was a kid.
No, that's the thing, is that I'm sure he is someone who, if given the option, hey, you could play Survivor now when you're 18, or you could play again in 7 years, he would choose the latter. Of course, he would take the opportunity now because you have to. You can't necessarily close that window and wait for the wind to blow it open again. So he would be appealing from the perspective, again, of actually being an actual adult and seeing how he would approach it with that maturity. And Sandy is just always a hoot. I think on the Countdown podcast, I think Rob basically called her a prototype Reem. I more so see it as Reem's happy aunt. I imagine the two of them as cartoon aunts in a house, where Reem's kind of the more dour, angry one, and Sandy's the cheerful, happy one.
Yeah, it's sad that even though, let's see, Spencer, Joe, and Sydney all lasted longer than Sandy, I think Sandy's the one I remember the most.
Well, of course, the Sandy iconic line ends up getting brought back many years later, as she was, I believe, the first to say "I'm pissed," even more than Debbie Wanner and even more than Liz Wilcox.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think so. Spencer and Jerry, I believe, were the only two who did the quarantine questionnaire. Spencer did at that time say that he'd definitely be interested in coming back, but I don't know whether or not that means that he's keeping up with the show or not. I agree with you. I mean, 34 years old, clearly still could do great. I mean, he's younger than a lot of people who get cast now anyway. I gotta be honest and say that Sydney, Candace, Carolina, we just didn't see enough to really get anything to say on any of them. I don't think Sandy's coming back, but it'd be hilarious. I would love to see Sandy on a podcast during season 50 if some of her castmates went back.
Yeah, I mean, listen, she's 68 and we are bringing back people as old as 69. Nice. But yeah, suffice to say, I think Sandy would be an incredible color commentator of just bring her in to sit at the sidelines. Maybe that's a celebration of Survivor 50. Is hey, we couldn't have you for the full 26, 30, 39 days. Instead, we just fly you to Fiji for a day and you just do color commentary on the challenge while Jeff sits back and relaxes?
Yeah, love it. That'd be so great. I would love that so much.
So, Mary, we've done a lot of mulling here. It is time for us to make our approach here. Before we bow out after this endurance challenge coach style, we have to pick a short list. I know that you had sort of, again, been wavering between legends versus people you want to see come back. Give me one name right now. Let's make it easy. One name that you feel comfortable putting on the short list for Tocantins.
I'd like to see Aaron come back.
I am good to put Aaron on the list as well. I will add Tyson
Okay,
onto the list.
that's the other person I had locked in.
So
I think I'm between two here, so I
yeah,
don't know.
so I imagine you're between Coach and Sierra right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like personally, I mean, there's a couple of outs. I'll offer you some outs here. If you feel sort of iffy on Coach, there are other seasons with Coach that I can put him on if you want to. I am really on and off about Sierra. I actually think Sierra lives in Australia right now, and it would be incredible if she was flown out for Australian Survivor instead. I think she has a lot of appeal to bring back, but I'm so in and out as to whether or not I want her on the short
I
list.
know.
Like, especially
See,
compared to Erin, who I feel like is much more of a slam dunk, or I guess insert hockey term here.
well, I actually while I do have Sierra written here, I have Brendan above Sierra. So I would actually probably
Oh,
rather have Brendan than Sierra, although I don't know the realism in that, but mostly just because his desire to come back is really what sold me on that one. If I'm just
mm,
trying to think realistically, we just don't know enough from Sierra about that.
yeah. And I like Brendan as well. I think my only counter to Brendan would be, again, like, there are so many other
Yeah.
Brendan types that either have existed, are existing, probably will exist, that I think he's a fun character in the moment, and I think he's someone that I would like to see return, but, like, for Survivor 50, and again, especially compared to Aaron, I'm not sure.
I
Basically, what it
know.
seems like what we're talking about, Mary, is that, like, there are tiers right now of, okay, there's sort of Aaron and Tyson, then there's, like, a Coach for consideration, and then there's, like, a Brendan Sierra tier where if
Yeah.
we really feel good about them, we can squeeze them in, but I don't know if we're feeling either one right now.
I know. I feel like, yeah, if I was to see, if they announced tomorrow, here's the cast of Survivor 50, and I saw Brendan, Sierra, or even Debbie on it, I'd be like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like they were interesting characters and be happy to see them play again. I think the most likely scenario would be Tyson and Coach being on that list.
So, are we good putting Coach in as our third?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm good with it. I think it's the obvious move. And I think it gets hard when you look at seasons where a few people have come back many times
Right.
because it's hard to not have your eyes immediately go to them.
But I think the good news is what we take out of this is, of course, Erin Lobdell, though I don't believe that's her current last name given her marital situation. But that's what again say about Tocantins is that I think it is perhaps an underratedly strong cast, despite the fact
Mhm.
that it contains a 4-time player, 2 3-time players, a 2-time player. I still think that there's a good amount of this cast that can be overlooked sometimes. And I think Erin and Sierra and Brendan, to a certain extent, are a part of that. I'm just not feeling at the moment that, again, Sierra and Brendan, I think, are in a certain tier where we can certainly allow a fourth, but usually for me, that's like the people I feel need to make
Yeah.
it. And I'm not sure. And maybe it's because to sort of move into my next topic of who from this cast would we want to see on another reality show, I just maybe have in my head that Sierra can take a hop, skip, and a jump that side of the international date line and go play an Australian Survivor.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. I could also see, I mean, I could see like I don't think that they would go to this well, just the way they cast. But like, if you stuck Brendan on like the challenge, I would find that interesting.
See, I would say that back in the day, of course, before politics went awry, if there was like Brendan on The Apprentice,
Yeah, I mean
I
that
think
would
it'd be
fit.
perfect because he was someone who had the reality TV experience, but also obviously had the business experience as well. And
Right.
yes, it was a little bit of a clown show in general, The Apprentice, especially the celebrity version, but like the civilian versions, they actually tried to bring in like people with legitimate business backgrounds.
You could see Brendan on what's that show that Boston Rob's always on where he's like building people's houses
Oh,
or
celebrity
whatever?
renovation.
Yeah. I feel like you could see something like that.
Wait, but did he be building the place for Brendan, or is Brendan is he like
No,
supplying the
like
house?
no, I feel I feel like Brendan would be like, remember me? I'm bare naked Brendan, maker of foods that we sold to
Probably should
Kellogg."
not go with that nickname.
You know what I mean? I just feel like it would be one of those people who you'd see on one of these, like, not exactly reality TV, but like these HGTV kind of shows.
Well, listen, you talk about house flipping shows, and tomorrow, here on the Survivor 50 wish list, we are going to be talking about a season that features a contestant that at one point did do a house flipping show. Of course, we are going to Survivor Samoa. When
Woo.
talk about seasons that function around one character, we are basically going to be talking about Russell Hantz and company. Russell, obviously a divisive figure in the fandom, especially nowadays, but where does he stand on getting brought back? And much like Tocantins, are there some people that would not necessarily be considered for another return, but perhaps under a microscope should be? We'll find that out tomorrow, as I'll be talking with the great Dr. Evie Jagoda to talk about Samoa. Mary, really quick, anyone from Samoa that you would have on your personal wish list to come back?
Jason.
I might come in as I have to do my research, but like I might come in as a low-key Jason stan. I love Jason.
I love Jason. He's so like down to earth. I don't know. He was one of my favorites on that cast. I feel like I just pulled it up and I'm like, oh wait, yeah. There was also like Shambo and Dave Ball on that season. So there's other characters that'd be interesting. But Jason'd be so cool to have. We just don't get people like him a lot. It'd be cool.
Well, Mary, this was a fantastic time. I'm not nearly as racked with pain over this process as Coach was, apparently, during said endurance challenge. But anything else you want to plug right now for the listeners out there?
Not too much, you know where to find me. Check me out on Frail Mary. At the time this drops, if you're randomly in the Richmond, Virginia area, feel free to come see me in a play. I'm going to be in Steel Magnolias in Goochland Community Theater, home of Tevin. So feel free to come.
That is maybe one of the most amazing sentences I've heard in the past month.
Yeah, no. Anyway. So yeah, that's all.
Mary, I cannot wait. I imagine that your character, if you need to improvise, I know a few stories from a guy kayaking down the Amazon that you can just come up with off the top of your noggin.
I wonder if I could somehow slip in what is a pace.
Ooh, or if you will, just start reading a poem out loud or quote Marcus Aurelius, even if it's not Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, I could do something like that. Maybe for the Sunday show. We'll see what I can get away with.
All right. Well, tomorrow, iron continues to sharpen iron on the Survivor 50 wish list, as we'll talk about who should come back from Survivor Samoa. Thank you all so much for listening. Let us know your thoughts either in the comments here on YouTube or on social media as well. Cannot wait to keep on keeping on with this process. Thank you again so much, Mary, for coming on. We'll be back tomorrow with Dr. Evie Jagoda to talk about Samoa. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.